Toni Morrison. She was a Nobel and Pulitzer Prize winning American novelist, and among her best-known books are Beloved, The Bluest Eye, Sula, and Song of Solomon. And just who was Toni Morrison? She was not only a Nobel Prize and Pulitzer Prize winning novelist, but she was also an editor and professor. Her novels are known for their epic themes, exquisite language, and richly detailed black characters. The most famous and regarded are Beloved, The Bluest Eye, Sula, and The Song of Solomon. And in 1993, Morrison became the first black woman to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. Despite her worldwide acclaim, the Ohio native was rarely writing full-time. She balanced working on her books with editing for the Random House, as well as teaching at Princeton and Howard universities. And through her own novels and the books she edited, she was instrumental in developing the canon of Black American literature. Morrison died in 2019 at 88, but the legacy that she leaves behind is abundant. In her early life, Toni Morrison was born Chloe Ardella Wolford on February 18th of 1931 in Lorain, Ohio. Today is actually her birthday. Lorain was a small city about 30 miles west of Cleveland. She was the second eldest of 4 children, and her father, George Wolford, worked primarily as a welder, but he held several jobs at once to support the family. Her mother, Rama, was a domestic worker. Chloe credited her parents with instilling in her a love of reading, music, and folklore, as they also helped her develop a strong sense of clarity and perspective. At the age of 12, the girl converted to Catholicism, and she chose Anthony as her baptismal name, after Saint Anthony of Padua. The Wolford family lived in an integrated neighborhood, and Chloe didn't fully become aware of her racial divisions until she was in her teens. She would say, and I quote, "When I was in first grade, nobody thought that I was inferior. I was the only black in the class and the only child who could read," she once told the New York Times. Dedicated to learning, Chloe studied Latin, and she read many of the great works of the European literature. She was also on the staff of Lorain High School's student newspaper. She graduated with honors in 1949. At Howard University, Chloe majored in English, and she minored in the classics. And it was during her college years that she adopted the nickname Toni. Throughout her life, people had mispronounced her uncommon first name, but someone mistakenly called her Toni, and she answered, and the name stuck. After earning her bachelor's degree from Howard in 1953, Toni went to graduate school at Cornell University, where she continued to study English. Her thesis? It focused on the works of Virginia Woolf and William Faulkner, and she completed her master's in 1955. She began to teach as well as edit. In fact, her first job was teaching at Texas Southern University. 2 years later, in 1957, she returned to Howard University to teach English as a faculty member. She also joined a campus writers group and began working as a short story editor, which later became her first novel. Morrison decided to leave Howard in 1963, and after spending the summer traveling with her family in Europe, she returned to Ohio as her marriage broke down. In 1965, she relocated to Syracuse, New York, to work as a textbook editor in the L.W. Singer, which was once owned by Random House. Morrison spent her free time developing her short stories from Howard's writing group, and it began and turned into a novel. Within a few years, she was living in New York City and editing trade books for Random House. Among notable titles she worked on, The Black Book, a 1974 anthology about Black life and history in the United States, as well as Contemporary African Fiction, a 1972 collection of African authors that included Chinua Achebe and Bessie Head. Eventually, Morrison became Random House's first Black female editor of fiction. She edited works by Toni Cade Bambara and Gail Jones, renowned for their literary fiction, as well as public figures such as activist Angela Davis and the boxer Muhammad Ali. I look very hard for Black fiction because I want to participate in the developing of Black work, Morrison once said. We've had the first rush of Black entertainment, where Blacks were writing for whites and whites were encouraging this kind of self-flagellation. Now we can get down to the craft of writing, where Black people are talking to Black people. Morrison had been contributing to the Canaan as an editor and simultaneously as a published author for many years. The rising literary star was appointed to the National Council on the Arts in 1980, and 3 years later she left Random House to focus on her writing full-time. 6 years later, Morrison returned to academia as the Robert F. Goheen Professor at Princeton University. She taught literature, creative writing, and African American studies. Morrison was the founding director of the Princeton Atelier, which partners students with well-known artists to workshop projects. But she retired from the university in 2006. Famous for many books, Morrison didn't publish her first book until she was 39 years old. But from then on, she was a literary star, a writer whose acclaimed work was taught in high schools and seen in movies and even on Broadway. Her name became synonymous with bringing Black culture and literature into the previously exclusive world of white publishing. And ironically, though Morrison was once told NPR's Fresh Air that she had hoped to publish under her maiden name, I really would prefer Toni Wolford, she said. But the publisher of her first book had already registered it under Toni Morrison. The prolific author wrote 11 novels, 2 novellas, books for children, and several nonfiction books, some of which collected her articles and essays. She also penned multiple plays and opera librettos. Many of her novels are historical, given her background as a classic scholar, but they combine highly literary aspects with accessible plots and characters. As for overarching themes, most of Morrison's work explores slavery at various times in history and contends with how gender influences the lives and experiences of both men and women, and celebrates Black American culture, especially in music and geography. Because her novels take place in different times and places over her lifetime, as a writer, Morrison revealed the effects of generational trauma, particularly in regard to racism and sexism in families and the larger community. Beginning in 1999, Morrison branched out to children's literature. She worked with her son, Slade, an artist on The Big Box in 1999, The Book of Mean People in 2002, The Ant or the Grasshopper in 2003, and Little Cloud and Lady Wind in 2010. As far as nonfiction, in addition to her novels, Morrison wrote nonfiction as well. Her first work was Playing in the Dark, Whiteness and the Literary Imagination in 1992. She published a collection of essays, reviews, and speeches called What Moves at the Margin in 2008. A champion of the arts, Morrison spoke out about censorship in 2009. She was a warrior, and today is her birthday. I celebrate this queen. Toni Morrison.